I was disowned for telling the truth. Family secrets revealed. The crystal glasses clinked with forced cheer as my father's 75th birthday celebration reached its crescendo. The Peterson family estate, a sprawling colonial revival that had witnessed 4 generations of calculated smiles and buried truths, felt suffocating that evening. I stood by the mahogany sideboard, watching my relatives perform their customary dance of mutual admiration, knowing what I was about to do would forever alter the choreography. I had carried this weight for 27 years, since I was 13 and accidentally discovered the ledgers in my father's study. Records meticulously detailing how he had systematically embezzled from his brother's share of the family business. The same brother who had died in disgrace 3 years later, his reputation destroyed by whispers of financial mismanagement, alcoholism, and mental instability. My Uncle Thomas, whose kind eyes and rumpled suits had been fixtures of my childhood, had been sacrificed on the altar of my father's ambition. When my father rose to make his customary speech, the patriarch surveying his domain, I felt something inside me finally snap. Not with rage or dramatic revelation, but with a quiet certainty. As he finished and the room prepared to toast, I gently tapped my spoon against my own glass. The sound rang clear and true. "I'd like to say something," I said, my voice steady despite the irregular beating of my heart. I had prepared no speech. Truth needs no embellishment. The room fell silent as I recounted the facts in precise, unadorned language. I explained how my father had systematically drained Uncle Thomas's accounts, how the family's charitable foundation had been used to hide assets and evade taxes for decades, how the prestigious Peterson name had been built on a foundation of lies, manipulation, and theft. I spoke for perhaps 7 minutes. No one interrupted. My mother's face had gone pale, then mottled red. My sisters exchanged glances of horror, not at the revelations, but at the breaking of our cardinal family rule. Never speak the truth aloud. When I finished, the silence stretched for 10 long seconds before my father set down his glass with deliberate care. "I think it would be best if you left, Richard," he said, his voice as cold and impenetrable as I'd ever heard it. Not angry, worse, dismissive, as though I were a minor inconvenience, a calculation error to be erased. My mother wouldn't meet my eyes. My sister Caroline, who had once confided her own suspicions to me, now stared at her hands, silent. My brother-in-law placed a protective arm around my sister's shoulder, as if I were somehow contagious. "You've always been unstable," my father continued, his lie so practiced it almost sounded like concern. "We've tried to help you for years, but this," he gestured vaguely at the air between us, "this fantasy you've constructed is beyond our capacity to address." I didn't argue. What was the point? I had known the cost when I chose truth over complicity. I placed my napkin beside my half-eaten cake, nodded once to the room, and walked out the door of my childhood home. No one called after me. No one followed. The text message came 3 days later, from the family attorney. My name removed from all trusts, accounts, and the will. I had been excised from the Peterson legacy as cleanly as a surgeon removes a tumor. Looking back, I realized I had been preparing for this exile my entire adult life. Each career choice, each apartment lease signed with only my name, each relationship I cultivated outside the family orbit. All of it had been a slow, methodical preparation for independence. Some unconscious part of me had always known this day would come. The years I spent as the family's reliable problem solver had taken their toll. How many times had I stepped in to smooth over my father's misunderstandings with business partners? How many of my sister Elizabeth's DUIs had I made disappear through connections and carefully placed donations? How many of my mother's prescription drug episodes had I explained away as exhaustion? I had postponed a promising research position in California to stay close to home during my father's first SEC investigation. I had ended a 2-year relationship with Thomas, the only man I'd ever truly loved, because bringing him into the fold would have meant exposing him to our carefully constructed facade. I had developed migraines, insomnia, a perpetual tightness in my chest that no amount of therapy could fully dispel. And for what? For the privilege of maintaining a legacy built on exploitation and lies? For approval that was always conditional on my silence? In the quiet of my downtown apartment, I began the process of building a life unburdened by family obligation. I accepted the research position I had been offered years before, though at a lower level than the original offer. I reconnected with old friends who had gradually been edged out of my life for asking too many questions or failing to show proper deference to the Peterson name. 6 months passed. Then a year. The only contact from my family came through intermediaries, lawyers with cease and desist warnings when I considered writing about my experiences, or financial advisors confirming the termination of my access to family accounts. Then came the first crack in their facade. The Boston Globe ran a small piece about inconsistencies in the Peterson Family Foundation's tax filings. Nothing directly accusatory, just carefully worded questions about administrative costs and investment patterns. I recognized the reporter's name. She had been investigating my father's business dealings for years, always coming close but never quite breaking through the wall of money and influence that protected him. I didn't reach out to her. I didn't need to. The truth has a momentum of its own once it begins to emerge. 3 weeks later, the Securities and Exchange Commission announced a formal investigation into Peterson Holdings. My father's photo appeared on the business page of several national newspapers, not in the visionary leader poses he had carefully cultivated over decades, but in a grim, tight-lipped scowl as he exited a federal building. I watched the family's unraveling with a detachment that surprised me. The cascade was slow at first, then accelerated with each new revelation. My sister Caroline's husband filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences, but transparently fleeing the sinking ship. My mother checked into a wellness retreat in Arizona that everyone understood was a rehabilitation facility. The Peterson name, once a golden key that opened every door in New England society, became a liability. I received a text message from Elizabeth, the first direct communication in nearly 2 years. "Are you behind this?" No greeting, no context needed. Just accusation. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. I hadn't initiated the investigations, tipped off authorities, or spoken to any reporters. I had simply stopped participating in the collective lie. Sometimes that's all it takes for the truth to find its way to the surface. The family attempted damage control through their usual channels. Substantial donations to politicians' campaigns, whispered conversations in country club locker rooms, promises and threats delivered through a network of influence that had served them well for generations. But this time, the old methods weren't working. Too many people had been hurt, too many regulations flouted, too much evidence preserved in digital records that couldn't be burned or buried. I received a call from a former colleague at the family business. Martin had been my father's executive assistant for 15 years. "They're saying it was you," he told me, his voice low, "that you manipulated the accounts, that you were the one working with overseas entities to hide assets. Your father supplied evidence to the investigators yesterday." I should have felt shocked, betrayed, enraged. Instead, I felt only a weary recognition. Of course they would sacrifice me. It was the logical conclusion to a lifetime of being the family's repository for uncomfortable truths and unspoken resentments. I thanked Martin for the warning and contacted my attorney. I had kept meticulous records of my own, not out of foresight or malice, but from the same instinct for self-preservation that had allowed me to survive in that household for so many years. Every email, every ledger I had access to, every meeting note and recorded conversation that might someday prove relevant. I had never intended to use them against my family. They were my insurance policy, my proof that I wasn't crazy, that the reality I perceived was indeed real. Now they became my shield. The SEC investigators approached me not as a suspect but as a potential witness. I sat across from them in a sterile conference room, my attorney beside me, and answered their questions with simple, unembellished facts. I did not editorialize. I did not express anger or resentment. I simply stated what I knew to be true. 7 hours of testimony, followed by 3 more sessions over the next month. The evidence I provided became the foundation of a case that expanded beyond financial crimes to include tax evasion, wire fraud, and obstruction of justice. My father's carefully constructed alternate reality, in which he was always the victim of circumstance, misunderstanding, or others' incompetence, crumbled under the weight of documented facts. The family's public implosion made headlines for a season, then faded into the background noise of other scandals, other falls from grace. My father ultimately accepted a plea deal. No prison time, given his age and health, but millions in fines and restitution. The family name was irrevocably tarnished. The business was sold in pieces to cover debts and penalties. The estate where I had grown up was put on the market, then sold at a fraction of its appraised value. Throughout it all, I maintained my silence in public. I gave no interviews, wrote no exposés, shared no cathartic social media posts. My vindication, if it could be called that, was entirely private, the quiet recognition that I had chosen correctly, even at tremendous personal cost. 3 years after that birthday dinner, I received a letter from my mother. The handwriting on the envelope was shaky but unmistakably hers, the elegant cursive that had adorned countless thank you notes and holiday cards over the decades. Inside was a single sheet of monogrammed stationery, nearly blank except for 5 sentences. I always knew. I told myself it was to protect the family. I convinced myself you were the threat, not the truth you carried. I was wrong.
I'm sorry. No signature.
No request for forgiveness or reconciliation. Just an acknowledgement that arrived too late to repair what had been broken, but perhaps early enough to prevent the same patterns from repeating indefinitely. I keep the letter in my desk drawer in the small coastal home I purchased last year. It's a modest house by Peterson standards, just 3 bedrooms on half an acre, with a view of the bay from the back porch. But it's mine, bought with money I earned through work I'm proud of, filled with relationships based on mutual respect rather than shared secrets. Sometimes, in the early mornings when the mist hangs over the water, I sit on that porch with a cup of coffee and reflect on the strange path that led me here. I didn't set out to destroy my family. I simply reached a point where I could no longer destroy myself to preserve their illusions. The local university offered me a research position last month, a good fit for my qualifications, with colleagues who know me only as Dr. Richard Peterson, marine biologist, not as the estranged son of a disgraced financier. I've begun volunteering at the Community Science Center, teaching children about ocean conservation and the delicate balance of ecosystems. My name tag doesn't carry the weight of generations or the burden of expectations. It's just a name. My name. Yesterday, I planted 3 oak saplings along the property line. Trees that won't reach maturity for decades, long after I'm gone. There's something powerfully affirming about investing in a future you won't fully witness. It's an act of faith, of hope, of belief in continuity beyond your own limited perspective. I don't regret telling the truth that night. I regret only that I waited so long, that I allowed the fear of losing my family to prevent me from saving them from themselves. But that's a lesson I carry forward now. That sometimes the most loving act is to speak the truth, even when, especially when, it threatens to dismantle everything you thought you were protecting. The family I was born into no longer exists in any meaningful sense. The institutions and traditions I was raised to venerate have been revealed as hollow and corrupt. But in their place, I found something far more valuable. The freedom to live an authentic life, connected to reality rather than comforting fictions. The peace that comes with integrity cannot be inherited or purchased. It can only be earned, often at great cost, but it's a price I would pay again without hesitation. The truth, it turns out, doesn't set everyone free. Some choose to remain imprisoned by their lies until the very end. But for those willing to face it, to speak it, to live it, truth offers something far more valuable than comfort or belonging. It offers the chance to become fully human, fully present, fully alive. And that, I've discovered, is worth any cost.